You're listening to the Business for Good podcast, the show where you'll hear inspirational stories about companies making money by solving some of the world's most pressing problems. I'm your host, Paul Shapiro, and I'm glad you've joined us. Welcome, friend, to episode 155 of the Business for Good podcast. Hey, thanks for all the positive feedback on the last episode with Eric Schultze from Good Humans. Shout out to longtime podcast listener Brian in Maryland, who said he found the conversation so useful, he listened to the episode twice. Respect, Brian. Presuming you're listening to this episode near its release date in December of 2024, I hope you're enjoying a good end of year, whether you're celebrating Hanukkah, Christmas, Festivus, or whatever you celebrate. In fact, I'll tell you a fun fact about Festivus. Now, Seinfeld fans know that December 23rd is a holiday filled with feats of strength and airing of grievances, but did you know that Festivus is not just a secular holiday invented by a Seinfeld writer, but that it was originally conceived as an alternative to the commercialism of the end-of-year season? Amazingly, Festivus's progenitor first proclaimed the holiday in 1966, but it was his son, who'd become a writer on Seinfeld decades later, who popularized Festivus by making the holiday central to a 1997 episode and caused people around the world to celebrate the holiday even now, still, decades after Seinfeld's end. Okay, well, that's a fun fact for you, but Seinfeld ended decades ago. Will climate change end our civilization decades from now? How's that for a transition to this episode? Perhaps you think climate change poses an existential threat to our civilization and you want to get off of fossil fuels as soon as possible, and surely don't want to see developing countries rely on fossil fuels like those in developed countries have done in the past century or so. Or perhaps you're not so climate concerned but simply want to see small businesses in Africa have access to uninterrupted clean energy so they can thrive. Or maybe, like me, you want both of those things. If so, you're in luck, because that is what this episode is all about. Just imagine trying to run a small business without a constant supply of energy. With electricity intermittency, you may not have access to Wi-Fi, a phone, a computer, a way to service your customers, and more. One way to solve this problem is to have constant access to fossil fuels to run diesel generators. Obviously, this is an expensive and dirty way to operate, though, which creates unsustainable costs for the business and for the planet. Enter iGen, a South African company specializing in the design and production of advanced lithium-ion battery storage solutions for residential, commercial, and industrial applications. Their batteries provide reliable, cost-effective energy storage to support renewable energy systems, reduce reliance on unstable grids, and address load-shedding challenges in South Africa. By enabling more effective use of solar and other renewable power sources, iGen plays a critical role in promoting energy independence, reducing carbon footprints, and fostering sustainable economic growth in a region where access to consistent power is a pressing need. In this episode, we talk with iGen CEO and co-founder Sidney Pakafi about why he started the company, how he's navigated and funded running a startup in South Africa, including having him and his co-founders not taking a salary for nearly a year, and what kind of an impact the company is making today. I'll let him tell you his story. Sidney, welcome to the Business for Good podcast.
Hi, thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me. Hey. It's exciting.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to have you on all the way from Johannesburg, South Africa. It's great to be with you. Thanks for taking time to chat. I'm really eager, Sidney, to hear why you did this, right? So 2018, you're thinking, maybe I should get into batteries? Like, what is the genesis for your thought as to how to start this company here?
So I'm not going to take all the credit. There's a reality that iGen has got 3 original founders. I'm one of the 3 original founders. So it's myself, Dumi, and Jacques Bass, who are the original founders. And interesting story, we had been exposed to the renewable energy industry before. When we worked for, myself and Jacques, we actually worked for another renewable energy company that had also just gone into energy storage. And that's where the exposure came from. Interest. Both of us had a history where we shared a history and an interest in technology and an interest in also electrification, right? Power affects us, right? And Tumi had also been exposed into industry. And by the luck of the draw, we just so happened to have a common friend who introduced all of us. And then we had a meeting at KFC. So this business was actually born thanks to KFC. The Colonel did something right on that one.
And so why were you thinking about this? Like you were already interested and exposed to renewable energy. What was the problem that you were trying to solve?
Problem statements in Africa, well, Southern Africa at the time were load shedding. So we had grid intermittency. For the longest time, our government had not invested in enough infrastructure. And because of that, we started having a bit of power outages, right? So it wasn't just driven by the green agenda. Because of the grid intermittency and the lack of grid growth, it was affecting us. So it was affecting every business that you could think of. So based on that, people and entrepreneurs had to solve that. But this is not an issue that was just local to South Africa, right? In the South African case, we had load shedding where we had not done sufficient investment in infrastructure and we had grid outages. But in the African context, there was obviously where there is lack of grid completely. So we started looking at this and saying, well, the bigger problem to solve is how are we going to give power to the average African on the continent? And can we actually do it within the context of the continent so we can create jobs? And at that time, there was a myriad of interest. I mean, Elon Musk has been out there not only putting out electric vehicles, but in his business, he also had a storage company. So, I mean, this started obviously exciting us, especially when we know that the local context issues of South Africa and the rest of the continent were going to be about power, and power is at the bedrock of any economic growth. So power and utility services like water are absolutely important for you to have a thriving economy, or at least the start of that.
Right. So you're stating something that is certainly true, Sydney, but for listeners to this show, most of whom live in the United States or in Western Europe, they have access to power at all times, right? Ever since they were born, they've had access to power. And you're talking about power being the bedrock of an economy, but a lot of people in the United States, for example, don't even think about it, right? It's just part of their lives. But try to describe what it is like, to have only intermittent access to power, to be able to run a business or try to run your home without access to electricity on a regular basis.
Well, I'm not sure if you can say that. You guys have got terrible weather, and weather outages have caused you guys to actually have power outages, right? Weather-related issues. So let's not say that you guys have the most reliable grid, and nor does Europe either. In certain parts of Europe,
So who do you think has the most reliable grid then?
Look, in the context, I would give that the USA is well developed, but then you'd have to look towards China, towards Japan, towards the Eastern countries that have got, a lot of excess power available. Having traveled to China, I don't think they have issues of power at all, but they're still growing their renewable energy base to become globally competitive. They are driven by a cost driver, right?
Fair. Yeah, fair. Yeah, I don't mean that power outages in the United States are literally non-existent, but for the sake of somebody trying to think about how they would run a business without perpetual access to power, what is it like?
Look, in the context, it is terrible. The intermittency would actually cause 6 to 8 hour blocks of power intermittency. Now, you can only imagine what that means to a productive day. And depending on when it occurred, you were lucky if it occurred at night, because most of the traditional productive businesses are not as affected, but residential households are affected. But if it happened during the day, obviously, one just has to look at billable hours of each and every company, right? This had an adverse effect on our economy. So when you take it on a day-by-day basis, it's a period of time that the government has said that now you're going to have to find some alternative source. People were running generators, those who can afford to implement generators in their businesses. Obviously, fuel costs are going to go skyrocketing. And that also means that your OPEX within your business is going to be insane. And the net effect of that is at some point in time, without steady power, you're going to have to either close down your business or find ways, alternative ways which increase the cost base of the business, ultimately not making it profitable, right? So it has an adverse effect. When load shedding started in our country, we didn't know that it was going to be a decade-long struggle. So we must also congratulate our government. We've had 200 days without load shedding. But with that said, when we look at it at the time, it was quite difficult for businesses. Businesses now had to plan some form of continuity plan. Do they buy? Do they invest in dirty power? Do they invest in using diesel? Or do they now work with these new technologies that are now in the market? Renewable energy was fairly new at the time. So now it's okay. Here's a new technology coming on stream. And yes, it's supported by the fact that it's green. It's supported by the fact that you'll probably, and we promise cost saving by obviously through generation from PV. But, the adoption wasn't as quick. So the adoption, we had to dispel quite a few myths. And when you're going into it from a traditional business perspective, it's, as an average business owner, having been in the technology side when I was not in the renewable energy side, the effect was, you'd watch your employees not do anything for 4 hours. And the reality is the internet is down, the phone is down, and the building is black. You can go down to the basement. If you have a black car like I had at the time, you can't find your car.
Yeah. And so what was the original idea for the company, right? So you go back and you're thinking about the problem, which is the intermittency of electricity. And you're thinking, all right, what's the solution? So what is the actual idea that you had in 2018 that you wanted to bring to life?
Yeah. So, we had seen battery energy storage. Fortunately, in country, there were already 3 other players that were in country. So we're not first to market by all accounts. But the one thing that we had seen is that the makeup of how they built, it was either predominantly components coming in from China. And when they were building batteries at the time, they were using a methodology of building large batteries. So we wanted scalability from the onset. We wanted to give you the smallest battery that you could possibly fit in. And then from there, allow you to scale and adapt with your needs. So we needed to be budget sensitive or cost sensitive. So we needed to be able to give you that option of flexible scaling of your battery energy storage. So that was one of the key things we were always conscious about from the onset of the business. One of the key things was also making sure that the technology was easy to use. So there is no point in putting out technology where you cannot explain or decipher the benefits very quickly, and the ease of use is there. So we needed to make sure that our technology passed the mom test. Can you switch it on? Will it work? So those were quite of the drivers, right?
And I presume that your knowledge of how to make batteries was limited when you started, right? So how did you think we're going to actually do this? If other companies are importing parts from China, you're going to do something else? Like what is the actual means of going from the idea to the reality of creating these batteries that are mom friendly?
So again, we were fortunate because we're not first to market, and we had worked for the company that was first to market. We had been exposed to what is a battery management system. We had been exposed to what are lithium iron phosphate cells, right? And we had been exposed to the myriad of technologies that were out there, from NMC to LFP. And what we had to choose was one that was safe, because safety was in mind. So as much as at the time NMC was still quite popular, we had to obviously look at also LFP on basis of safety, right? And we could also see that the production stream was likely to grow quite fast, and it became almost like the industry standard, right? Those are quite a few of the actual aspects around it. Now, looking at other people's products is different from when you have to build your own. One of the hardest things that you have to do is now starting to secure a supply chain. That is very difficult when you are bootstrapping. And that's essentially what we did, right? We had to go dig into our loans. No one was willing to buy from us or let alone invest in us for the first 18 months. So the first thing that you have to do is you have to make sure you have sufficient financial reserves. Fortunately, all of us were...
Were you paying yourself at all? I mean, these first 18 months you had no...
Look, we did go 9 months without any salaries. It's quite awkward when you get home if you are married. In those 9 months, you have to explain that the idea is flowing. The company is in progress, but you've got nothing to show for it, and the bills are staring.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Right. And how did your wife react to this?
I think one of the key things, because this wasn't my first rodeo or first business, this was well, let's do an account. It was my fifth business, right? I had the pleasure of
Got it.
exiting one business and three others I had failed. And the other one I exited successfully. And this was obviously the fifth venture. This time I took a different approach, one that I wish I had taken in my youth. Involve your wife from the planning and ideation phase first.
Okay.
So,
This is
so get
what they
buy-
this is what they don't teach you in business school. Okay.
Yes.
So involve your wife. So what was her contribution here?
Her contribution is that she still had a stable income. And we had to understand that during the early phases of a business, we are going to be a single income household. That is a reality. And all the partners had to do the same. So we had to, and it's one of the things that we spoke about quite clearly, that when we start, we shouldn't expect immediate success. And obviously it was drawn out slightly longer than we expected, but at least we didn't expect immediate success. All of us had some experience. Tumi had experience in business. I had experience in business. The person who was rather new and a novice that we had to manage his expectations was Jacques. So we had to manage Jacques' expectations and say, look, a great idea, putting it into action, opening up a warehouse and getting the supply chain right. There are some days where you're going to struggle to put petrol in your car and get to work, but be prepared for that. And let's start off at the basis of you need to create a support system. The first things and the mistakes I made as an entrepreneur beforehand in the earlier businesses was not to create that support system. So the support system was the family members that at least understood what I actually do. I had to first get buy-in from them, buy-in from your wife, buy-in from any other family member who's able to lend you assistance at a given point in time, i.e. in my case, it was my mother, and say, guys, I've found an idea that I think is revolutionary. I believe it can be actually a business. At some point in time, it will employ people. At some point in time, we'll gain investment. And at some point in time, it will be self-sustainable. But in the periods leading up to that, there are some days that I'm going to come home and I'm going to need assistance. And that buy-in helped a lot because, you know, when we were starting the business, the engagements became easier at the home front. I had to get there and say, okay, as predicted, I'm broke.
And so at this point, were you seeking investors, or were you thinking, well, we need a minimum viable product before we get an investor, or we wanted some revenue before investors? Like, what was the actual pathway to starting to bring in capital from the outside?
Our pathway was first create an MVP. No one's going to buy what you say. We don't have a lot of seed capital in South Africa, so people don't buy ideas. You can sing on top of a mountain, but no one really cares. So we had to show them something tangible. So we first had to have an MVP, an actual product that you could see, feel, touch, and kick. Thereafter, you had to also prove that you have some form of market. You've also got some form of supply chain, and you've got a business case that works. Then thereafter, you are then going to be fortunate. And we were fortunate. We were able to engage what we call enterprise development funding or ESD funding. We were able to engage that from a bank, a financial institution. Then after that, we started the successive funding rounds with our first investors being Secha Capital, and they de-risked the business. And then they brought on other investors subsequently. But that is a reality of where we are. And when you look at the timeline, that's before we first sell our first product, it's 8 months later, right? So within the first 6 months, you've sorted out supply chain, but the idea of the business had started a year prior. So when we're talking about 2018 and the registration, the whole of 2018 was actually spent preparing for the journey. So the work had been done a year and a half prior before we actually registered the business.
Yeah, it reminds me of a line that is attributed to Abraham Lincoln, where he said, "If you give me 5 hours to chop down a tree, I'll spend the first 4 sharpening the axe." And it's like you're preparing there. So, are most of your investors from the African continent, or do you have investors from beyond Africa as well?
Well, we've got institutional investors from South Africa. So Edge Growth, that also works with the First Rand Group. They are in South Africa. Secha Capital Capital, they're also homegrown. And Sanlam Investments now, they are also homegrown. Sanlam Investments is an insurance firm, large scale insurance firm that also is an investment company. So we were very fortunate in that regard that they've got programs where they do enterprise development and they do, funding for small businesses and help them develop their procurement levels, their supply chains, and essentially also put in, capital, whether that be in the form of debt or equity, right? Obviously, in the early stages of the business, everyone takes up equity. You only started being able to have a bit of a mix in the later stages where you could afford a bit of debt and a bit of equity.
Yeah. Okay. And who were the first customers? So you spent 2018 sharpening the axe, so to speak.
Yeah.
And then you start actually selling. Like who are the first people who are buying these new batteries from you?
So here's where it becomes quite interesting, right? So we go into market thinking the first customers will be our installers. So we didn't have, our path was we were going to service the professionals in industry who are then going to take the product on to the end user, right? And we go to market and no one is willing to buy our product. No one's willing to touch us with a 10-foot pole because we do not have any reputation. We've never sold anything. Our marketing is lackluster. We've just started. So no one's willing to put their hands on you. So we then go back to the drawing board. And in the drawing board, we realize that there's still an opportunity on the e-commerce side of things. So we create our own e-commerce direct to market channel. So that is called Sunstore. So we create that and we push products straight to the end user consumer. And with the idea that at the point that we secure an end user consumer, we will go back to a professional who can come and install the system. And we had to pick the right type of professional as well, someone who was going to then go to the rest of the market and obviously bid on our behalf. So it was a bit of a strategic move, but we said, okay, if no one is willing to buy from us in the early phase, we'll get the end user consumer, convince them. And then from there, we'll bring along an installer or / professional EPC or delivery execution partner to come in and do the installation, because that's not what we do. What we do is actually do the manufacturing. So we got that right. I remember the customer by name. It was the first telephone call. After you've done your marketing, you put out some Google AdWords and someone clicks on it and they had an interest. The first call came through. It came through to me. He started asking about the specifications of the product. I spent time basically trying to obviously understand his problem statement. Was it just load shedding? Was he looking into the future? When the cost of electricity becomes higher, is he then going to invest in a product that's also going to be a cost saving mechanism? So I literally sold the first product and delivered it myself.
Nice. It reminds me, there's a conference room at the Amazon.com headquarters named after the very first person who ever ordered a book from them.
Yeah.
And so maybe that'll be one day in your office, like whoever the name of this first customer was will have their own room.
Yeah.
So you start out, Sydney, with you being the salesperson, right? So you're doing the actual marketing by phone with your first customer.
We break up the business into three. Sorry. So I look after sales and marketing and business development, and I look after all the content, and I look after our go-to-market. Tumi looks after operations and finance, and Jacques looks after product and production.
And you are the three executives of the company. How many employees are there now?
At the time, 2. So we had 2 other employees and the 3 of us. One employee who would help man the front desk as a receptionist, and one employee who was in the production environment, plus Jacques.
Okay. And compare that to now. Now, what is the total team?
2 buildings, 50 employees, and roughly about 5,500 batteries sold.
5,500 batteries sold, all of them in South Africa, right?
South Africa, some have gone as far as Nigeria. Some of our batteries are in Zimbabwe. Some of our batteries are quickly going to be moving into Zambia. So yes, they've traveled more than I have extensively.
Very nice. Very nice. Now, are you also doing the maintenance on these batteries? Like if they need a repair, are you guys the ones who are helping to repair it?
So we do the
Okay.
support as well. So we run our own support, and of course the disassembly and maintenance is part of it.
So somebody in Zambia needs a repair, you're able to do it.
So yeah, we go through an RMA process on our side where the end user, the installer would actually run the request, but we would send a replacement battery. But the original battery, should they be a technical defect, would have to come back to factory in Johannesburg, and we would then repair it from there. But the teams or distributors that are in different countries normally have, spare parts, components, and replacement batteries, depending on their geography.
Is over 5,000 batteries sold enough to make the company profitable now, or are you still dependent on outside venture capital?
I think we still need to increase the amount of capital within the business. We are obviously striving to make sure that we break even. And it's a reality, right? When you are trying to grow a business as fast as we were trying to, from creating a product and also entering a market and also playing a price game, because soon thereafter, China discovered the African market. So we started having stiff competition and price point pressure. And we realized that we're going to have to scale, and we are still obviously in the zone where we would like to increase the amount of capital in the business.
Sure. So let me ask you about that then, Sydney, because obviously what you're doing is helping to improve the economic prospects of your customers, right? Yeah. There's a clear human welfare advantage here, but at the same time, there's a clear environmental benefit, right? Yeah. Like you are helping to promote renewable energy on a continent that would essentially be helping your customers to leapfrog the fossil fuel era, right? In the same way that a country may leapfrog the telecommunications with having landlines and going straight to cell phones without ever having that. You can help them go straight from having essentially no reliable energy to having only renewable energy. As a result, I would think that there are a lot of these ESG investors all over the world who might be interested in what you're doing. Folks who want to, yes, see a return on their investment, but they also want to promote the renewable energy agenda as a form of climate mitigation. So is that an investor target for you? Are these folks who are climate investors the type of folks who you're looking for?
Definitely the right type of investors, especially when we start looking at the problem that we are actually solving. But the reality is, again, when you look at the South African context, there's not enough capital in circulation. There's not enough capital within the African context. So we do need more development finance. We do need more seed capital. We do need investors who are climate change conscious in order to best obviously drive the business. We want to obtain market share and increase profitability, but we do have an underlying need to actually make sure that we leapfrog and get renewable energy so that Africa as a whole is competitive, right?
Right, exactly. And if you're following the climate progress that is being made, you know that it is not possible to have a scenario where Africa remains without a constant power supply and doesn't eventually go to either the fossil fuels that would allow that and that have allowed that in other parts of the world, or just switching over to, like, for example, what you all are doing with clean energy sources like lithium-ion batteries. And so it does seem like an absolutely critical technology, both for the reason of economic development, but also for climate mitigation. So I'm certainly rooting, Sydney, for you guys and for all of your success at the company. And I'm hoping that you all have continued success and will find an investor base even wide beyond outside of South Africa. But let me ask you, Sydney, you mentioned this is now your fifth company. You had one exit, three that didn't go so well. Hopefully you will exit here as well. But what resources have been useful for you? Obviously, you're very fluent in startups and business. So what resources have been useful for you in your journey that you might recommend to others as they may think about wanting to start their own companies?
I think if anything, reading and acquiring the right type of knowledge will always assist you. Let's start off at the most base level. You need to create support structures, mentors. I think that is a key driver. If you can find people within the space who can assist you in terms of mentorship, who have been there, it always helps. It makes the journey a bit easier. The problem statements that you're likely going to come across would have also been seen by other entrepreneurs. So you do need to fall into some form of clusters or incubations, or if you can find an entrepreneurial incubation hub, or you can find business executives and leaders or business entrepreneurs who have been down the journey successfully, it's always good that you engage them on what you can and cannot do, the pitfalls of your strategy, right? That's one of the things that's there. Yeah. The second part of that is the engagement at home level. You're going to need as many support structures, your personal support structures. You're going to need that. The second, and then from there, the books and resources. I've read some very cool books over the years. One of my favorites is Winning the Unfair Fight, by Sam Hazeldine. Sam Hazeldine, for small businesses, how small businesses can take on and beat the giants. So that book was quite impressive on my side. And the reason for it is that, it gave the actual journey. You are going to start off small. You're not going to have all the resources at hand. And the reality is that you're going to have to find ways of getting to market faster than anyone else. You're going to have to find quick, innovative ways and finding ways that allow you to be more fluid within your business and not have processes that help your business to stagnate, right? So that was one of the books and resources I thoroughly enjoyed. And just how he actually tells the story and finding a niche, carving a niche for your business. Sometimes it's a bit difficult to carve a niche, but there is a reality that you because you are small, it means you're agile. It means, you can make a decision.
Okay, well, we'll certainly link to Sam Hazeldine's book there in the show notes for this episode at businessforgoodpodcast.com. Sydney, I do want to ask you one final question. As somebody who has now been involved in 5 startups, you probably have a lot of ideas for companies that you think should exist, that you hope should exist, but you don't have the time to do them because you're focused elsewhere. What ideas would you give out to listeners who are thinking about starting their own company, whether in the clean energy space or elsewhere, that you think would be good for the world?
Yeah. Depends in which context and continent you're on. In the African continent, if you're going to start a business, it's always good to bet against the governments. I think governments across Africa have failed quite a bit in terms of service delivery. Some of them are making a concerted effort, but if you're going to start a business in the African continent, look at a service delivery business that looks at what governments have not been able to achieve or deliver. It gives you a space where you can do infrastructure services, service delivery that government fails to actually deliver to the people, and you'll have a market that's ready for the uptake, right? So that's one of the things, if I talk purely from an African continent perspective. Again, other businesses in healthcare. I mean, we've got aging populations. People are living longer. Thank God for that. Medicine is great, but what are we doing about those aging populations? What type of services are we building for people who are part of that segment? Aging populations need entertainment. Aging populations need better healthcare. Aging populations need they have a whole new myriad of needs.
Well, it's funny. It's funny you mentioned this. Since last night, a 58-year-old Mike Tyson got in the boxing a 27-year-old fighter, and I just thought, can you imagine in a previous era you watched? Yeah, it wasn't much of a fight, but you imagine a 58-year-old man getting in the boxing ring with somebody 31 years his junior, happening a generation ago. I mean, there's no way.
Yeah. And we're going to have to start thinking about that. We're going to have to start thinking around what are the new and improved services that we can give to the aging population globally, right? And what type of healthcare, what type of needs are they going to have? They're a new consumer segment, right? And, well, we call them older, but they are a new consumer segment because no one has truly targeted them. We just see them as retarees and we put them into
in fact, I was reading about the advancements in robotics in Japan because they have far more aging population as they have such a low birth rate. And they've really advanced robotics to help care for all of these senior citizens. It's really impressive because they have so few younger people there. So maybe that'll be part of what's needed in the future as the human population continues to get older. We'll see. But
well, it's going to be quite interesting. I think also mobility, right? So you'll find people who are aged, but they're mentally sound. So let's just help them with
for sure.
Maybe there'll be advancements.
I couldn't agree more. So I hope that somebody will take you up on that, Sydney, and start their own company in that space. But for now, please know I'm rooting hard for your success, impressed by your story, and I hope that you have great success. And while you're at 5,000 batteries sold, I look forward to talking again when you're at 500,000.
Yeah. Thank you, Paul. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to tell our story. Our story is an interesting one. We employ in our company roughly 75% young people. So most of the people in our country in our company are under the age of 30. We are young, we are energetic. So I'm hoping that at a given point in time, as we advance ourselves, we become truly a contender, a competitor. And in our market space, we allow other young people to springboard and come up with more and better initiatives than we have.
Thanks for listening. I hope you found it useful, and if you did, please let the world know. Leave the show a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast app and share the episode with your friends. Who knows? Maybe you'll inspire one of them to be in the business of doing good themselves.